If you ask me to predict, I would say that in the next 3 months, the Ukraine deal should be done. And therefore, I would argue that that would pave the way for at least the 25% sanctions to go, and for the India-US trade deal also to go through. Of course, the tragedy is that he sees only the tariffs on India.
We are collateral damage.
We are collateral damage here, as the instrument to put pressure on Putin, which I think is completely misplaced. Because if he really wanted to put pressure on Putin, he would say, "I sanction every bit of oil going out of Russia."
And also, internationally, we've seen Pakistan has got a $1 billion line from IMF, $800 million of ADB, Karachi Stock Exchange is up, they get to have breakfast and lunches with Trump. This sudden turn of events between the souring of relationships between India and US, has it anything to do with Operation Sindoor?
The US and Pakistan have a history of being disappointed by each other, and they also have a history of ignoring that history and sort of trying to come back to it. What we are seeing right now is something that absolutely has to do with Op Sindoor and what happened this summer.
So I think we've all seen videos which run in Pakistan of them looking at videos of a Gurgaon or a Bangalore airport and saying, "Bhai, pata hai kahan gaye?" The other guy says, "Must be Europe." Saying, "No, this is India. See where they've gone." And you
Absolutely.
have a Munir saying that we are a dump truck and you're a shiny Mercedes. So you've been in Pakistan. You were High Commissioner there.
So you have the ruling elites and you have the abjectly poor. You know, Pakistan didn't go through the land reforms we went through in the 1950s. It didn't have an aha moment we had in 1991, which led to reform, despite the IMF programs. And if you ask the IMF leaders why they don't insist on this structural reform, they would shrug and say that's above our pay grade. We don't get into politics. I believe that there is some conversation about, can we have an early win in the middle sector, an early harvest agreement.
What is the middle?
So that would be, say, area around Sikkim and so on. And where we would say, during a meeting between Modi and Xi, perhaps say that we've had an understanding in a certain part of the border.
Welcome to the Growing India podcast. I'm Monika Halan. I lead conversations with experts in economics, policy, geopolitics, and geoeconomics to decode this increasingly complicated world. The Growing India podcast is a joint initiative between Grow and me to think through some of India's most pressing issues. Today, I have the privilege of talking to Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. He wears the badge of honor of having been expelled by Pakistan in 2019 when he served as the Indian High Commissioner there. Welcome to the Growing India podcast, Ajay. So glad to have you. And I have to tell you that I am just starting to read your wonderful book, Anger Management. It's on Pakistan, so the title says it all. And I actually do want to begin with that, just Pakistan, because over the last few months, the feeling that at least I get and some of my friends get is that, we are the sanskari elder brother, bhai, sab kuch, we've done everything by the book, we are good. And then the rogue younger brother who's gambling and everything, and he's just not a good guy. Mummy gives him ice cream money, and I get to stand in a corner. So with Pakistan, we are wondering what is going on. And also, internationally, we've seen Pakistan has got a $1 billion line from IMF, $800 million from of ADB, Karachi Stock Exchange is up, they get to have breakfast and lunches with Trump. So this sudden turn of events between the souring of relationships between India and US, has it anything to do with Operation Sindoor? I mean, did we hit something of the Americans? What happened here? Suddenly kya ho gaya?
Great. Thanks, Monica, first for having me, and thanks for reading the book with so much attention.
I'm reading it with two. There's the book and then there's the footnotes. Okay,
excellent. Excellent. That's a great way of deep diving because, it's a 600-page book, I think with 800 footnotes. So it's sort of interesting to do a deep dive kind of take. But just to borrow from the title of my book, Anger Management, this is a relationship where both brothers are very angry. I think India channelizes that anger better, whereas Pakistan gets into a paroxysm of kind of excitement and anger. And if you see the kind of crazy statements coming out of the army chief when he was on US soil, saying that we can take India and we can take down half the world with us, and some absurd things like you may be a Mercedes, but we're a dumpster truck, so if you hit us, you get hurt. So I think Pakistan plays multiple games, and right now it's playing a transactional game with the United States with some degree of success. And as our minister recently said, that the US and Pakistan have a history of being disappointed by each other, and they also have a history of ignoring that history and sort of trying to come back to it. So what we are seeing right now is something that absolutely has to do with Op Sindoor and what happened this summer. Because I think India's threshold of tolerance of terrorism was reached with the Pahalgam incident. And now, if you see the parliamentary debate that followed, the public tolerance of terrorism is close to zero. So even in Parliament, when Pakistan was debated, the Congress attacked the BJP from the right of the BJP, not from the left. They didn't say, why did you go to war? They said, why didn't you go more to war and end the problem of Pakistan once and for all? So the opposition was asking the government, why did you stop? So I think we have a new normal after Op Sindoor, and that new normal is essentially saying is that the next time there would be terrorism, there would be consequences even deeper than the ones we saw, and there'd be action even more intense. So in that sense, it's a sort of fragile situation. But India's instinct overall is to manage the Pakistan problem, not to be sort of bogged down by it, not to get into a forever war like Russia got into Ukraine or the Israelis got into with the Hamas, but manage the problem. We managed it this time in 88 hours and warned that there could be more to come. So I think it's still a fragile relationship, but something has changed, including putting the Indus Waters Treaty on abeyance, which was more serious from Pakistan's point of view than even the kinetic action. That is what has worried Pakistan even more, because water is a very emotive issue for Pakistan.
I'll come to water in a minute, but what happened to the US? Like, did we actually hit something of theirs, that there was an overnight breaking down of this great love between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump? I mean, they were real buddies.
Yeah, so I think a few things mixed up there. And certainly the personal pique, because of not giving Trump enough credit for the ceasefire, was part of it. But I don't think that's the central story. The central story in the India-US relationship is the art of the deal. It is the trade deal, and Trump's own book talks about it: push, 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 and push, and until you get the best possible deal. So I think two deals got mixed up in making the India-US relationship go through so much trauma in the month of August. Let's not forget that it was fine in July. It's only from 1st August, and we are still in August, that the relationship seemed to tank, and we got into this 50% tariff situation. So I think what happened was that for the art of the deal, Trump wasn't really happy with the deal stitched up by his team and the Indian team, which, as you know, had 5 rounds of discussions. The deal as stitched up by the Mandarins was lying on his desk for 5 weeks. But he said, Dil mange more. He wanted more. So he wanted a deal perhaps which included the export or market access for dairy and wheat and soya and so on, but also something of a sweetener like the Japanese or the Europeans gave him, which means I will invest $500 billion into the US economy. Or I would buy $750 billion worth of energy. So he wanted a few headlines on that. And I think of its own, the deal would have gone through with a little bit of negotiation. But Op Sindoor came in the way, so there was a bit of peak about not getting enough credit. In India, there was peak about Trump claiming too much credit and jumping into it at a sensitive time. But the other geopolitical event that also fell into this mix was the Russia-Ukraine deal, which Trump was trying to do right from the beginning of his tenure. So the second 25% was certainly an instrument to put pressure on Russia. So I think these two or three issues combined in the India-US relationship, and on India's part, there was certain annoyance also about Pakistan, but that wasn't really a deal breaker.
I'm going to still stay with Pakistan. Yesterday, there was news reports by the evening that we've done in goodwill. We are sharing flood data with Pakistan. So after all now it looks like posturing to say that the water treaty is off. We will decide when we want to give water, what we want to do. So are we signaling to Pakistan and the world that we are ready to rethink the water decision that we took earlier this year? Because that really shocked a lot of people. That what are you doing? Why are you doing this?
I would interpret it a little differently, and I would say it's sending a couple of signals. One is that we don't have a problem with the people of Pakistan. This is a humanitarian gesture. There could be a flooding, so we are warning Pakistan. We have a problem with the ruling military elite, which has taken Pakistan in a different hostile direction, and we don't have a problem with the people. But even on the Indus Waters Treaty, the abeyance message is it's now on the table. Let's renegotiate it. All expert opinion in India said that it was an overly generous treaty of an upper riparian. And we wanted to renegotiate it. We sent various notices. And we feel under international law, we are justified in keeping it in abeyance and eventually renegotiating it. So that reality does not change. Nor does the reality change that we will link the flow of the waters to terrorism. So when India develops the capacities, say in the next 5 to 10 years, of having the canals and having the dams and the storage on the western rivers, India could potentially use it as leverage to make sure that Pakistan dials down on terrorism. And that, I think, is a very explicit goal. So any short-term move like sharing flood data or not sharing flood data, I don't think is going to influence that larger choice that India has made.
So you're saying it's more like a chess move right now to say that, and it's also signaling to the world that we are not an evil nation which will go after the people, and just coming to the people of Pakistan. So I think we've all seen videos which run in Pakistan of them looking at videos of a Gurgaon or a Bangalore airport and saying, "Bhai, pata hai kahan ka hai?" The other guy says, "Must be Europe." I'm saying, "No, this is India. See where they've gone." And you
Absolutely.
have a Munir saying that we are a dump truck and you're a shiny Mercedes. So you've been in Pakistan. You were High Commissioner there. What is that average life of the Pakistani very different from the average life of the Indian? I'm going to include my economics part here, where we've seen huge reduction in poverty. We've seen millions poured into the middle class. We've seen consumption of protein in the bottom 10% of the population, fruits, vegetable, protein. I have data from demand and supply side, both, to say, yes, indeed, the poorest of the poor are eating better. What's the story of the average person in Pakistan?
It's a terrible story. Okay. And it's a sad story. When Asim Munir says a dumpster and a Mercedes, it's only a Freudian slip. He does realize it. Yes. And what the army is trying to do is tell the people, so what if you're so badly off? So what if there's an 11x difference in GDP, and so what if India is more powerful, and so what if you're seeing in your videos the affluent India and the affluent middle class and asking questions. Our ideology is superior. So we are a better nation because of our ideology, the way our leaders built us, and the way the army wants to take you. The state of the economy is for all to see. This is the 24th IMF program they're going into. There's a likelihood they'd go into the 25th. You mentioned the $1 billion. They got a $7 billion EFF, the extended funding facility, last year. And there is just no business model in Pakistan to make a profit. They spend more than they earn, they import more than they export, and there's just no business model. The FDI isn't coming in any shape or form. So what Pakistan and its elites try to do is just leverage their location, leverage what they feel is strategic resources, and try to make money out of it. But for the people, the situation gets worse. And you asked about the middle classes there. There's virtually the middle class is non-existent. So you have the ruling elites and you have the abjectly poor. And Pakistan didn't go through the land reforms we went through in the 1950s. It didn't have an aha moment of the kind we had in 1991, which led to reform, despite the IMF programs. And if you ask the IMF leaders why they don't insist on this structural reform, they would shrug and say that's above our pay grade. We don't get into politics. But, that has been the goof up by the IMF also, not insisting on a political reform, on asking the elites to, especially the military elites, to leave the capture of the Pakistan economy.
Yeah, it looks like a really unfair world where, again, we're doing everything by the book and our country ratings go up, but then so does Pakistan, which is economically a failed state. So again, this sort of, the pipeline of money keeps going. And I don't think that IMF and ADB doesn't know where that money goes. It's largely siphoned off. Hardly anything goes really into the development projects. And this then gets me to this question of that we live in a very difficult neighborhood. I think most of the world right now is in a difficult, but being a large country, they are suspicious of us. And I wonder why. Because neither do we do Navy games in the sea like China does with Philippines, nor do we extend our territories. If some country's in trouble, we send vaccines, we send aid to Sri Lanka. But we are considered as this big brother in the neighborhood, where we're actually very self-effacing, I would say. And is it correct? I mean, is it correct for me to even think like that? You would know better with the diplomacy in place. That are we really that self-effacing and generous, or are there hard games being played underneath?
I think on the neighborhood, you're absolutely right. It is a tough neighborhood. It's a difficult space. And if you look at the neighborhood, India is perhaps an island of some kind of stability, whereas a lot of the neighbors go through issues of their own. And, India's had some sort of neighborhood first policy always. It's gone through many avatars. But the basic deal with the neighborhood is that we'll take care of your prosperity, we'll help you in your prosperity, you help us in our security. And it has to be asymmetric because the neighbors are smaller. But if you deconstruct this, you realize that you need not be excoriating yourself for what's happening in the neighborhood, because much of the dynamic of what happens is internal to those countries, internal to those societies, and you don't have the either ability or intent to interfere in those processes. So if you look at your neighborhood, you have two adversarial neighbors, China and Pakistan, abnormal countries, one run by a rogue army, the other run by a communist party, an abnormal country by any stretch. And you have two countries that have gone through coups and are failing states. Afghanistan went through a coup in 2021, and so did Myanmar in 2021 February. Both run by sort of military elites or the Taliban and so on. The other countries have also had issues. So Sri Lanka saw a street revolution and a change in government. Fortunately, it came back on the rails after the 2022. Bangladesh saw a street revolution in 2024 in the ouster of Sheikh Hasina. We've seen Bhutan and Nepal also go through a process of change. In Nepal, it was more bloody, but it finally moved to some kind of democracy. Add to this the fact that everyone would like to play the China card. And to some extent, it's understandable. They have two large neighbors. They try to get the most out of each. So Maldives, which played that card and said India out, is suddenly now welcome Modi, and it's back into balancing the two powers. So there is a bit of a big brother is bad attitude, which is inevitable given India's size. There is a bit of we can play the China card, and there's a bit of internal processes that go on. But I think the way India's managed it by asymmetric benefits. So, we give $4 billion to Sri Lanka when it's down, and that Sri Lanka appreciates it, despite the fact that their leadership was known to be, believed to be pro-China. We do the same with Bangladesh. We have 15 golden years with Sheikh Hasina. We've given $8 billion worth of lines of credit. And I think this is, the current regime is probably a hiccup. It might change with the next election or may become more balanced. So I think we live in a tough neighborhood. We are doing the best we can, but we can't blame ourselves for everything that's happening. And we need to be spending the big bucks on our neighbors, expecting only that they take care of our security interests, not necessarily help us for our economic interests.
So I see the views, and typically the barometer is social media comments and what people in your network are saying. I see them oscillate 180 degrees of saying Prime Minister Modi is a mastermind. And then when you read about the flood warning, what are we doing? We are completely useless. So, I would like you to tell our viewers that is it true that the truth is somewhere in the middle? Are we playing the game right? I mean, you've been through different administrations. How would you rate our foreign policy moves vis-a-vis earlier? Are we on the right track? What would you want the people to understand? That should we be reacting to every piece of information, or is there a larger plan in place?
Yeah, so I think I would caution that, or mention that need for caution about reacting to everything. Because in foreign policy, we need to play the long-term game and look at the larger national interests. I believe that now, particularly since Modi has Foreign Minister Jaishankar guiding him, we are doing it much more professionally, not emotively, because, if you become a very social media sensitive kind of policy regime, you might want to react to a lot of things and answer, do a ball by ball on each of the perceived wrongs that happen. But the long game will make sure that you look at the larger national interest and you look at the big picture and go ahead with a bunch of policies. So I think there would be, and we need to make the distinction between tactics. Day to day, we might, do one or the other thing, and we might get a few things wrong, but also at the larger long-term direction in which we are going. So I would say we have it right. We are doing it right. And many of the things we're doing have an element of continuity that have been happening at least since the Cold War ended in 1991, where we need to be nimble in terms of dealing with the not just the major powers, but also with our interests in the neighborhood. So I think we haven't been too knee-jerk in our reactions, and that to me is a positive thing.
So there is a longer game that we are playing. It's not, like you said, ball by ball. So I'm going to, so in your book, you've laid out 3 scenarios for Pakistan, which is business as usual. One is Pakistan evolves into a normal state, and then a conditional pessimism, deterioration. I would actually think it's the last, looking at what they're doing right now. One is, what do you think will play out? And, having a toxic neighbor even next to our house is such a problem because you can't deal with them. Your only option is sometimes to move out. We can't do that. So how do we deal with this?
So I would say the base case still remains for me that we remain neighbors with periodic problems, and we deal with that problem periodically as it comes up. But in the long term, we hope that we are able to influence matters in such a way that Pakistan gets a more enlightened leader, like an army chief who says, enough is enough. I'm suffering more than I'm able to make India suffer. So I think that would be the long-term play. But one of the things I mentioned during Op Sindhu to a large number of investors who got very worried about the situation in India was that India is demonstrating the ability to deal with its neighbors and deal with an escalation instinct, with being tough, and as well as a de-escalation instinct, that I don't want them to take up all my bandwidth, because my central mission is to grow at 6.5 to 9.5% in the next 30 years. And I don't want these guys to distract me. So I would place the tactical adjustments we are making with China in that context, that we want this relationship to go. We have to service $140 billion out of trade and investment. With Pakistan, we can't let it distract us beyond a point. So we solve the problem, or we deal with it in 88 hours or 90 hours, and then get on with it, hoping, to resolve it, to at least manage these issues. So I think that would be the way we would deal with Pakistan in the foreseeable future. But we need to keep in mind the larger picture of trying to be able to influence various constituencies within Pakistan to question their government on what it's doing.
Expand that. Who are the various constituencies? So, Balochistan.
I have been arguing that there are many Pakistans, and there is a peace constituency. There are the civilians. Right now, the army is in control, but let's say 2% of Pakistan, the elites, are controlling, the elites in power, controlling this policy. And if there's a change in this elite, it can change. But we almost saw a revolution on the streets in Pakistan in 2023. When in May, the most popular leader in Pakistan is in jail today. And they thought, the PTI cadres thought they'd almost ejected the army in May of 2023 in what they call the Strawberry Revolution. But through Pakistan, and you'll meet a lot of Pakistanis overseas who have different views than the government on how to go about it. So I think we should have these conversations. We judge Pakistan's behavior by how its ruling elite behaves. That is what we do at the state-to-state level. But there should be ways we find of having these conversations with multiple other players. Right now our worry is not the radicalization of the people. It's the radicalization of the army chief. He is talking the language of complete hostility towards India, which I suspect is not shared in a lot of constituencies, perhaps in the religious right to an extent. But his problem is that he's trying to rally everyone around the flag of anti-Indianism. So I think I don't see a huge radicalization going on. In fact, I see multiple insurgencies in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, against the army, which is dealing with these insurgencies with a political challenge from the most popular party, the PTI, and an economic meltdown. So they are dealing with all this at the same time, and at some point along the way, this house of cards could collapse.
Now, coming to a house of cards which will not collapse, which is China. Okay, so there is this whole sort of China will split into five. It's not going to happen. They've done, it's going to be an unpopular view, but they've done really well by their people. They've pulled millions out of poverty. Look at what they have done internally. So, yes, it's a communist rule, all of that, but it has got capitalism playing underneath this party system. We've again had a very difficult relationship with China. We are making friends again because of suddenly the world has changed. How far would we trust somebody like China? Because right now we seem to need them and they seem to need us. And a third question is that what if, and this is a what if, is there any world in which the RICS forms, Russia, India, China? So if we form a bloc, which is a very difficult thing at the moment to think about, but that's your sort of challenge to, this continent is a challenge to the rest of the world. So China, our relationships, how friendly should we get with them? And is RICS even a possibility ever?
Right. So, I think the way to frame this is the short term and the long game. In the short term of just this month of August, we've run into a negative phase of our relationship with the United States, which was our primary strategic partner in the world. We have another strategic partner, which is Russia, which we are close to, and so is Europe. Now, China is and will remain a strategic rival, a strategic competitor in the frame of the next 30 years. There is no doubt about it. What we are trying to do, given the interdependence and the dependence particularly on critical supplies in various sectors, including pharmaceuticals and electronics, is to do a tactical adjustment with China. The immediate problem that we had with them, starting if you count 2020 Galwan, has run its course. And, there was a meeting between Modi and President Xi in Kazan last year in October. So the rapprochement that you're seeing unfold, and which will unfold at the end of this month when Modi and Xi meet again in Taizhen near Beijing, is that this is a tactical adjustment because we are basically trying to adjust the fundamental, economic relationship. We will start the flights and the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, and the visas will be eased up and so on. But the border negotiations, which were the central cause of this dip in the relationship, will remain. And China's whole attitude that it wants to be the dominant hegemon in Asia will not go away. So we'll have to deal with this China, and if we come up with a tactical adjustment as against a strategic reset, we are good. And that is, I think, what is being attempted. It has nothing to do with the dip with the United States, and I think all the engagements you'll see this month, including Modi meeting with Putin, perhaps also at the same summit, is something that predates any little problem we had with the United States. Because don't forget that with the US, we seem to have 6 months we were on a roll. So the Trump relationship, and the Trump relationship itself comes on top of multiple other India-US relationships, which have gone on for the last 25 years in a very, very positive direction. So, of course, we might come to the US separately. But
yes,
on China, I would say my one-line summary would be that this is a tactical adjustment to help our industry, to help our economy. It is not a strategic reset. It's not that China is suddenly a close friend.
And this will probably be a very controversial question, but have you also heard that there have been discussions already to exchange Arunachal for the part that China holds and just finish this border tension?
You know, the border tension has been with us for decades, and it's not going to go away anytime soon, despite what you've heard. So there is no such thing. What did happen last week was when Wang Yi came here. He had a dual role. He was meeting with Minister Jaishankar as the foreign minister, but he also met with NSA Duval as the special representative on the border. And this was a process that had started in 2003. I was then with Prime Minister Vajpayee in his office when this process started of special representatives discussing the border. And there have been various exchanges of maps. So the only issue right now on the table is a proposal for a so-called early harvest agreement. So, you know, we talk of the middle sector, the western sector, the eastern sector. So I believe that there is some conversation about, can we have an early win in the middle sector, an early harvest agreement.
What is the middle?
So that would be, say, area around Sikkim and so on. And where we would say, something like during a meeting between Modi and Xi, perhaps say that we've had an understanding in a certain part of the border. But there are experts in India, and I'm no boundary expert, but the boundary negotiators who feel that in 2005 we signed an agreement with the Chinese, which was a principles agreement, which said there'll be only a package deal and no piecemeal arrangement on the border. We'll give you this, we'll give you that. But, you know, in an ideal situation where we want to reach is that instead of this line of actual control, which is a perception line, that we think our line is here, they think their line is here, we exchange maps. At some points, we delineate it in the map and agree on a common line, and then we demarcate it with border pillars. So that is a while away. But with the Chinese, everything happens at a glacial pace. So I don't think you're going to hear any sudden announcements. It will take a while. The conversations will go on. But the important thing would be if we say that despite, let this continue, the conversation, as long as one or the other party is not trying to change the status quo with too much aggression. And let's get on with the job of doing other stuff, doing the economic stuff, where we have such a great deal of interdependence. Talk about the waters, talk about Chinese investments in India and so on. So those conversations will go on, and the border will be managed much better than it was.
Because it was China who provoked the border conflict.
Absolutely.
And now we are saying that there is hope that we will shake hands on more stability, right?
Exactly. So I think that's the key word, stability rather than normalization.
Right.
We are saying, can we go back to the status quo of 2020 April,
Yes.
and then talk about the rest of it. The other thing that should worry us is that China has demonstrated both its capacity and intent to weaponize the interdependence in trade.
Yes.
To weaponize even the waters in its, at least its, in the things, the signals that it is giving. So we had a situation of the Foxconn engineers being withdrawn. We had a situation of a freeze on the tunnel boring machines and the magnets and the rare earths. So all that, even though that is kind of back to normal, but they've shown us there's a spigot and we can turn it off, we can turn it on. So this is something that we need to keep in mind when dealing with this strategic rival.
Yeah, and I think they have, again, I'll come to the US, but every great power weaponizes what they can. I mean, the US weaponized the payment system and the financial system, but I'll come to that.
And now trade.
Now trade, yeah. So, yeah, great powers, US is behaving more and more like China, but I'll come to the US in a minute. I want to come back to the RICS. That's not going to happen. Right?
No, I can tell you that I dealt with the RICS. I was the official kind of dealing with it when I was in charge of the Eurasia desk in the Ministry of External Affairs. And it was an idea that grew in the 90s. And it grew when both in the US unipolar moment, that, the US seemed to have won the global war, the unipolar moment had come. The end of history was supposed to have come. Everyone, the Russians, the Chinese, was set to be molding themselves into capitalism and democracy. And that's the point where the Russians said, let's have a countervailing kind of force. And it seemed all harmless at that point of time. So I don't see the RIC coming back as a serious challenge. It could be a tactical signal at some point, but it's not really something that will be revived, nor the BRICS for that matter, which is the existing body with the RIC as the sort of core. But I don't think there would be any sort of rearrangement of power equations. In certainly not in the short term. There could be some signaling, some social media conversation, but it's not something that will be a long-term game.
Now, finally, to the US. So when you get through all the huffing and puffing, the theater, at least it seems to me that President Trump wants three things. He wants the US trade imbalance to correct. He wants US to get out of the forever wars. He wants Europe to pay for its own defense. And a fourth is he wants a Norwegian prize called Nobel. Why he's so fixed on that, we don't understand. But anyhow, so would it be correct to say that this is really what he wants and he's going about it in a certain manner, but the core of what he wants is this?
Absolutely. The way I would frame it, he's been on strategy.
Yes.
It's just that the tactics have been to detonate the world. Right. Now, the strategy has been end the wars, end unfair trade, end illegal immigration. And this is what the MAGA base has been saying. This is what was, the sort of stated ideological mission of the far right. And this is what Trump has been emphasizing. But the way he went about it was the art of the deal, which means push everyone. And the two instruments he used were the sanctions and the tariffs. And, if all you have is a couple of hammers, every problem will look like a nail. So he used those instruments to do everything he wanted to. And I think that was where he failed to factor in the fact that he has now scared away the allies and partners. So all the allies, including Canada and Mexico, and of course South Korea and Japan, and particularly the EU, won't trust the United States anymore. That might, in fact, be a positive for both the allies itself, as well as the partners, because they would have their own internal arrangements. They would have, reduce this dependence, particularly for Europe, reduce this security dependence. But I think this is, so he's been going about it in a manner which has been hugely destructive for the world. But the mission has not seen a dilution. The mission remains the same, but the objective, the method of achieving it has been very questionable.
Do you think it's a correct mission for the US own interests? So let's not look at the manner in which he's doing it. And even about the manner, because this is such a well-defined, so it's hard-coded the way the world is in the last 70, 80 years. Don't you think you needed this disruption to change the way, of course? Because I don't think Europe took it seriously. So they've been saying it for a long time. You have to pay for your own defense. They just did not take it seriously. So again, this is a little difficult to even say, but one, is the mission right for US itself? And two, could it have been done in any other way? Minus a war.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I would say two parts of it are all good missions to have, which is end the wars and perhaps end illegal immigration. But stopping unfair trade is voodoo economics, because trade happens because you have a competitive advantage, and that is 101 in economics. And countries trade because they see an advantage to trading. So to detonate the whole trading system, after having yourself made China the sweatshop of the world in the 2000s and 2010s, is something that appears unfair. Now, some of it might be valid, right? You may be concerned, as India is too, that too many single point global value chains are not good for the world. It concentrates power, it is dangerous, it can be weaponized, and that correction perhaps was required and is required. But to use these instruments for everything, including stopping wars and then targeting some countries, and then doing it in not a moral way of doing the right thing, but using the cards where you can use them and not using where you're unable to use them, or you feel that the other party may retaliate. So I think clearly the method was incorrect. The method was destructive. It's not been good for the world. It's reduced the level of trust in the United States in multiple ways as a potential partner. But some of it will probably, when the dust settles, be good for the world. And particularly if you look at Europe and security. Europe was having it good for a long time, living on cheap goods from China, cheap energy from Russia, cheap security from the United States. And now they are being forced to spend, instead of 2%, now 3%, perhaps 5% of the GDP on security. So that is something which is a moment where Europe will have to redefine itself and redefines many of the things that it took for granted for all these decades.
So I was actually speaking to a banker, senior level person in Austria, and she was saying that we popped champagne when the announcements were made on how much they were going to spend on infrastructure, on defense, because she said Europe was just sleeping. Nothing happened. It was all about social security, the green movement. She says nothing was happening. So finance is looking at this whole thing in a very different way. So it is disruptive. And to your point, I'm just going to, and again, President Trump is doing what he has been saying for 30 years. And I'm just going to quote an interview. He said, this is 1990 interview, "We Americans are laughed at around the world for losing $150 billion year after year for defending wealthy nations for nothing. Nations that would be wiped off the face of the earth in about 15 minutes if it weren't for us. Our allies are making billions screwing us." Trump being Trump, his language hasn't changed. It's got even more aggressive. But this is 1990, then interviews with Oprah, Larry King, NBC. It's all been about tariffs for 30 years. So he's doing what he said he would do. Why is the world surprised?
Yeah. The world is surprised partly because he didn't do it in Trump 1.0.
Yeah.
And that's because he says the system took over. They didn't let him.
Yeah.
And so he's come in Trump 2.0 prepared. And normally when you have a far-right government, you expect it to campaign from the far right, but govern from the center.
Yeah.
Now, Trump campaigned from the far right, and what surprised the world was also his governing from the far right, doing all the things that he threatened to do. And I think that is what is surprising the world. Now, just take the Russia-Ukraine war. In that he came with the mandate and the stated objective of ending it very quickly. And what he ended up doing was he had to wait a long while. Putin sort of gamed him in multiple ways. But that was certainly an objective. And I think if there's one positive thing that Trump will achieve in this year, it would be ending this war and ending, in fact, both the wars, the West Asian War and the European war.
Yeah.
Both Netanyahu and Putin are taking him through the hoops. It won't be easy. But I think he will manage to achieve that objective in this year, and that would be positive for the world.
Okay, and coming to the war, again, it might be an unpopular view, but so there is one view where Russia is this evil expansionist power which wants to finally take over Europe, all of Europe, not just parts of it. And the other, and I'm sure you've read and heard Professor Mearsheimer's work. He has said for a very long time that it is the US which has provoked Russia for a long time over the expansion of NATO eastwards. When the agreement was done, the two powers had agreed that these are the lines and no new entrants would be allowed. Now, but that expansion of NATO has gone on. Russia has gone on saying that Ukraine is a red line. To open the door to Ukraine into NATO, while knowing very well they were not going to be led in, do you think Ukraine was sort of played by the American deep state into this war? Because I also remember Professor Sachs saying that 2022 Istanbul, the peace deal was almost done. And then
Absolutely.
US and UK spoke to Zelensky and said, you continue, we will give you money and arms. So has the coming of President Trump changed the playbook of the American deep state? And do you agree with this hypothesis that there was a provocation?
Absolutely. And John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs are the realists who've been talking about this for the longest time, but there have been multiple others. As against the neocons and what is probably the deep state, which was talking of dual containment of Russia, and Russia continuing to be the evil despite the Soviet Union having been dismantled in 1990. So I think there's much that is right about this thesis that, they say as part of this thesis, you'll hear Sachs and Mearsheimer say that in 1989, when James Baker III went and met Gorbachev and requested him to, allow German unification. I happened to be in Moscow at that point. Okay. The assurance was that NATO would not expand eastward anymore. And but it doesn't matter what anyone else is saying. The fact is that the current president of the United States has on more than one occasion hinted that he buys this theory. He's saying that his predecessors, including Biden, but also predecessors before that, allowed this to happen, which means the United States today is saying that we used Ukraine as a proxy to contain Russia, to weaken Russia, and I want to stop it, is what the current US president is saying. So this is the mea culpa moment of the United States, which is saying that we goofed up. And I think he's right. But what he also has to acknowledge is that he has to give Putin the peace deal and the ceasefire all at the same time. And rather than string him along with a ceasefire and then not give a peace deal, which Putin is expecting. So the Americans have already conceded. And therefore, I feel the Alaska process is the most hopeful process, the best process after the Istanbul process that you referenced in April 22, when they had initialed and they wanted to go ahead. So now the Alaska process, a conversation between the US and Russia to be followed by a conversation between Ukraine and Russia, is the best hope we have of ending this war.
What is the difference between a peace deal and a ceasefire? Because we've heard all of these terms, and where are we at with Russia and Ukraine right now?
So I think that's a very important distinction to make. A ceasefire is when literally that, when you're not shooting. But a peace deal is when you have a more long-term arrangement. And this is precisely the difference in the Russia-Ukraine war between what the Europeans want and Zelensky wants and what the Russians are willing to give. Because in Putin's mind, the ceasefire and peace deal should be one package, because he simply doesn't trust the West. And there's that historical mistrust that in the 90s they trusted, they did not get anything in writing, and therefore this is the price they've had to pay. So they would have to accept, or he would like Zelensky to accept the ceasefire along with the peace deal, because he would think that the Europeans will want a ceasefire and then use that period to regroup or to just not agree on a peace deal. And he has a battlefield advantage. So the party, the belligerent in a war who has a battlefield advantage, will want not to give up that territory, because at the end of the peace deal might, if the peace deal says that you keep what you have, then you'd rather get a little more in the battle. So I think that's where we are with the peace deal. And the problem after the Alaska process and the Washington process, where Trump first met Putin and then the Europeans, is that the third phase of it, which was supposed to be the Putin meeting with Zelensky, hasn't happened. And here the Russians are saying that it has to be stitched up before the leaders meet. And what they might want to do is have something nearly settled and then have Trump, Putin and Zelensky meet. They were talking of Hungary at one point, and seal the deal. So I think I would say that the two pending issues really are of territory and security guarantees.
So territory is the Donbas region, the Russian-speaking Ukraine part.
That's right.
On the east.
So as of date, Russia has the advantage in 5 districts.
That's
it
right.
had Crimea already, but 4 other eastern oblasts or districts, as they call them, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Now, in Donetsk, it's a little complicated because the Ukrainians have dug in and made the so-called fortresses, which means that the Russians don't have all of Donetsk. But I think that's a matter of detail. At the end of the day, the Russians would be willing to give up some and keep some territory. And at the same time, they would want the security guarantee of the West and Ukraine saying in writing that they won't join NATO. And on its part, Ukraine needs a security guarantee that Russia will not invade again. So these issues need to be sorted out. The Americans have already conceded, and Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, had said so at the beginning of the year, that Ukraine can't expect to hold or get back the territory that it has lost. It's war. So I think we'll come to a solution of that nature. It might take more time. It might take more gamesmanship, and it can get uglier before it gets better, because right now there's a perverse incentive to both sides to try and conquer some more territory until the deal is done. So it's in the interest of the world and the two parties that you quickly have a peace deal that includes a ceasefire. And Trump will have to use every bit of personal influence he has to achieve that. And of course, the tragedy is that he sees only the tariffs on India.
We are collateral damage.
We are collateral damage here, as the instrument to put pressure on Putin, which I think is completely misplaced. Because if he really wanted to put pressure on Putin, he would say, "I sanction every bit of oil going out of Russia." But he's not sanctioning China. He's not sanctioning Europe. or anyone else receiving that oil. He's only using India.
Why? Why just India?
Because I think it was convenient.
Okay.
Because it's one of those accidents of history that you had a Op Sindoor, you had a trade deal pending with India. You simply added on another 25% at that point of time. Some people argue that it was personal pique. I don't think. I think we overstressed that factor. It was more that it was a convenient instrument to use. Whereas if he'd used the same instrument with China, he feels he's already sanctioned China enough, but China could have retaliated with freezing rare earths or magnets or whatever. So I think it was just a convenient tool that was sort of handy in the toolkit at that point, and was used. So if you ask me to predict, I would say that in the next 3 months, this deal, the Ukraine deal, should be done, and therefore I would argue that that would pave the way for at least the 25% sanctions to go, and for the India-US trade deal also to go through. So I think at that point, all these little personal peaks will possibly be forgotten. But what won't go away is a basic mistrust now of the United States.
Correct. We are recording on 26th August. And 29th, I think, is when the penalty tariffs come into play.
Perhaps 28th. 27th was the date.
Yeah. So it's like literally tomorrow.
Yes.
So it's a very difficult thing for me to ask you, what do you think? Will they actually kick in?
So I would guess that they will kick in, for the reason that right now Trump will see the balance of advantage in mounting the pressure on Putin. And he would feel he would be able to persuade India, because I feel that it will certainly be reversed within the next 3 months. So these might kick in only as a sort of negotiating pressure on Putin. But if I was advising Trump today in the White House, I would tell him not to do it. I would tell him, okay, on the eve of these, give a 60-day extension and say that this is the pressure I'm putting on Putin, the pressure remains on Putin, and you don't alienate India. Because even within the United States, people are beginning to say, has Trump lost India?
Yeah.
Because, right now, India is not making a public spectacle of its annoyance, but having those 50% tariffs in place, with every day, the public pressure and the image of the United States as any reliable partner will at least publicly go down to near zero.
So there are some of the foreign experts are saying that this is Trump's biggest foreign policy error, to push India so hard. But then I read some of Trump's older interviews, and he has, again, it's a very interesting quote, where he says that, basically, you have to, in a negotiation, you have to go on pushing till you take the other person to the brink. So a smart negotiator doesn't push you over the brink, but you take the person to the brink. So are we near the brink, or are we actually very calm on the surface but paddling away furiously beneath?
So, I think we are not at the brink yet.
Okay.
Because the way India is playing it cool. Our markets have played it cool as well. And the policymakers are cool. Now, what Trump may not be losing the corridor, because people say that he's crazy and you factored it in, but he'll lose the street. The social media, the others, the public perception of the United States will tank. And that is very hard to build, because that has been built over the last 25 years. The so-called hesitations of history were overcome. The public perception also was that the US was a good place, a good partner for India to have. So I think that is the cost he might pay. But, for the art of the deal, as you're saying, it is push, 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 till you reach the brink. He tried that with China and failed, because the bond markets came and, as you know very well, corrected him. And his own instinct, as he said, Trump says everything because there's nothing secret diplomacy for him. He'll say that maybe I'm not supposed to say it, but let me say it anyway.
And I say it 5 times.
Yeah, and say it multiple times. So he said, I wanted to go ahead, but people lost their nerve on China. So, I had to stop because of these bond markets. So I feel that there would be both these pressures on him to not lose India, to not push India beyond a point, because, we have 200 years of colonial rule history, so we won't be seen to be capitulating to a power. That's why we said we will continue buying oil from wherever it's cheapest. So India would not like to publicly give in, but India, I think, is being smart enough to do a lot of private diplomacy. You don't need to do everything on Twitter and tell the Americans that, look, this won't be good for you.
How much of this boorish behavior and this unhinged behavior, how much of it is theatre? Because if you listen to some of the tech bros who are close to him, when they speak of a very different man, one-on-one. Is it theatre, or he genuinely cannot control what he says?
I think it is theatre. And, and his critics say it's taco, right? Trump always chickens out.
Yeah.
And I think it probably works very well in the real estate business. As a New York real estate mogul, maybe he got real good deals out of it. But if you kind of use the same template for geopolitics, for reordering your relations which have been built over decades, you lose in one critical sense, that the trust for you as a good faith actor and someone who would respect an agreement that has been signed diminishes, and people will make their hedging choices, their balancing choices, and their need to not be dependent on the United States, because that this is not a very dependable partner or ally.
Yeah, in fact, Professor Sachs, I saw something of his recently, and he was really happy that I've been telling Indians for months, do not trust the US. And I'm glad they found out this way, that do not trust us. Get what you can out of us, but don't trust us. So the world has changed post-Trump. So the American deep state has also seen what they did covertly is also working overtly. They're tasting blood, right? In terms of, because you're the biggest power, biggest military, all of that, you are getting away with a lot of things. And there is something very worrying happening where US companies are giving lagan to the government, to Trump. I think Apple has done that, Intel, 15%. US is now China, right? Where is this going? So how do you go ahead in a world where a large democracy is now behaving like an authoritarian regime? What happens? So the worry is not really Trump is now 2 years, right? Because the midterms come in. The worry is institutional memory. We can do this.
Absolutely. I think that's something that is changing. And we need to remember that many of Trump's battles are internal. They were, his sense of hurt and being wronged in his first term and being thrown out by, the deep state and so on. So he's now trying to deploy the state power in capitalism. So, you saw the close relationship with the oligarchs, which had started with Musk, and the distinction between the state and the capitalist champions was less and less. And now with Intel, his spin doctors are saying that, look, Biden goofed up. Under the CHIPS Act, he gave them, he was giving the wealthy American companies so much subsidy that we just asked them for their hafta. And we've just said that you better give us 10% of the shares, and we got $10 billion or whatever. So, there could be some merit in that argument. But the point is that he's tampering with US capitalism and giving a huge element of insertion of the state there. And that will have its own repercussions. I don't know if he's thought it through because he lives transaction to transaction. It's a deal. But at one level, he's invoking the state's might to interfere in decisions that corporations should be making.
And for all of us who are free market believers, this has been shocking to see that US, which was like the epitome of free markets, is using its state power. But I want to come to the last question, which is the whole de-dollarization debate in the world. So I personally don't think it's going to happen for a variety of reasons. You don't have the pipelines, you don't have, if at all, you will probably have to move to a crypto handshake between, say, Russia, India, and China, for example, where we agree on our own constructed cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin, not anything else. But also I say that because they passed the Genius Act. So what it says is that a particular kind of a crypto, which is called a stable coin, each dollar worth is backed by a dollar or a US treasury. Now, for us in India, it doesn't mean very much. But for countries which are politically unstable, where the banks are not safe, where there's hyperinflation, you need to keep money in hard currencies. And in cross-border transactions, a stable coin will be extremely useful. So where do you sit on the de-dollarization and the BRICS having its own currency and the ability of this Genius Act to actually perpetuate the strength of the dollar worldwide?
You know, I would, if I was advising Trump, advise him to not overstate the case of de-dollarization and not even worry about the BRICS. So I don't know whether it's theater or whether he's really worried. Because the BRICS, with the kind of countries it has, is really a non-Western group. It's not a anti-Western group at all, and particularly having India in the mix. Now, the BRICS at no stage has talked about de-dollarization. There may have been, Russia and China encouraging that kind of talk, but it doesn't have either the capacity or the will to do anything close to that. What the BRICS countries were talking of at best was some more trade in local currencies, that I will designate a trade in rubles or in rupees and, take that forward and settle it in that currency rather than in the dollar, which is really not de-dollarization. That is a transaction-based approach. You mentioned stable coins. I don't know what the future holds in terms of technology, so I am neutral on it, and I feel as a system, as a regulator, our system will be very conservative on that. So I don't think any RIC deal on currency is going anywhere, because our suspicion of China will exceed any degree of annoyance or suspicion we may have of the United States. So with the Russians, we've had an experience in the past of doing rupee trade and
we've
ruble
done
trade.
that,
Yeah, we've done that and we can do it again, but certainly not with China.
So just last one, maybe a communication to the viewers. How do you decode this ever-changing world? Because again, emotions go from loving the US to hating the US. We are all over the place. So just a little bit on how do you negotiate it? Because this turbulence is not going away. It is here for a while.
Absolutely. So I would say this is the revenge of geopolitics over geoeconomics. The big power play is back, which we thought we'd left in the 19th century. And it is certainly a world in greater flux. It'll certainly be a world that will be a lot more uncertain. But I think India has played its cards well. But even ever since the world in the 1990s, the Soviet Union ended, the end of the Cold War, India has been fairly nimble in playing the game. So it is important to remember that countries should play the longer game rather than be upset by short-term news or short-term daily developments in a Trumpian revolution time that come, and try to and have faith in the government that it understands the game and it is playing the longer game. So I think that is the way I would sum it up. Play the long game, and with the US, keep calm and negotiate.
Keep calm and keep breathing. Thank you so much. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Great having this conversation, Monika.
Thank you for watching. I do these conversations so that you can join the dots and make up your own mind about the India story. Do write to me on who you'd like me to invite next.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing. Please read the risk disclosure documents carefully before investing in equity shares, derivatives, mutual fund, and or other instruments traded on the stock exchanges.